The dust was a living thing, a shroud she wore. It coated her tongue, gritty and bitter, filled the hollows of her eyes, and clung to the cracked, weeping skin of her feet. 3 suns had risen and set on her torment, each dawn a new crucifixion, each dusk a momentary, treacherous peace. The earth was an anvil, her bare soles the iron hammered upon it. Stone, thorn, sun-baked clay, they had stripped away dignity first, then skin, then hope. Now, a blur on the horizon, a smudge of human making against the vast, indifferent canvas of the plains, pricked the last vestiges of her will. It was either salvation or the grave. She stumbled towards it, a broken doll animated by a dying string. The shape resolved itself into a cabin, small, weathered, a testament to endurance against the wind and the emptiness. Smoke, a thin, pale ribbon, unspooled from its stone chimney. Life. Or the illusion of it. Her legs gave out a final time, and she crumpled, a heap of rags and pain, not 20 yards from the door. The world dissolved into a swirling grayness, the taste of dust her final communion. He found her there when he went to draw water from the well, a dark shape against the pale earth that hadn't been there at sunrise. Silas moved with the quiet economy of a man long accustomed to solitude. His shadow fell over her before his presence registered. He knelt, his knees cracking softly like dry twigs. Her hair, matted with sweat and dirt, was spread like a dark spill. Her breath was a faint flutter, almost imperceptible. He saw the ruin of her feet, blooded and raw, the tattered remnants of a dress that spoke of desperation, not choice. His face, etched by sun and a quiet sorrow, remained impassive, but his eyes, the color of a winter sky before snow, took in every detail. He had seen hardship, felt it burn in his own bones, but this was a creature stripped to its very essence, hunted and run to ground. He slid one arm beneath her shoulders, the other under her knees. She was lighter than a sack of grain, a bird with broken wings. He carried her inside, away from the relentless sun, into the cool dimness of his home. The scent of wood smoke and dried herbs, the faint, lingering perfume of a life lived and lost, greeted them. He laid her gently on the simple cot in the corner, her head lolling to one side. For a long moment, he simply stood, looking down at her, a question mark drawn in the dust of his own lonely existence. The wind moaned outside, a low keening that seemed to understand. He didn't know her story, didn't know the devils that nipped at her heels, but he knew the language of suffering. And in that silent understanding, a decision, unspoken yet absolute, settled within him. He moved then, with purpose. Water from the bucket, still cool from the well, was poured into a basin. He found a clean cloth, worn soft with use. Her eyes flickered open as he gently began to clean the grime from her face, tiny, involuntary sounds of pain escaping her lips. They were wide, animal dark with terror, and she tried to pull away, a movement so feeble it barely disturbed the rags she wore. "Easy," he said, his voice raspy from disuse, like stones shifting in a dry creek bed. It wasn't a command, but a statement, a low rumble of reassurance. He worked with a surprising tenderness, his large, calloused hands unexpectedly gentle as he bathed her feet, the water turning a muddy rose. Each touch was measured, careful, asking nothing. She watched him, her fear a tight knot in her chest, but exhaustion was a heavier weight, pulling her down. He didn't ask her name, nor where she came from. He simply tended to her, his silence a strange kind of comfort in a world that had only offered her noise and brutality. He found an old tin of salve, something his Martha had used, smelling faintly of pine and beeswax, and smoothed it over the ravaged skin of her soles. Then, he wrapped her feet in clean strips of linen. The relief was a wave so profound it almost drowned her. He ladled broth from a pot simmering over the low fire, the aroma of herbs and slow-cooked meat filling the small cabin. He held the spoon to her lips, and she drank, the warm liquid a balm to her parched throat, a slow rekindling of a life she thought extinguished. When she could take no more, her eyelids heavy, he pulled a thick, patched quilt over her. Before she slipped into the deep well of sleep, a sleep deeper and safer than any she had known for an eternity, she saw him take a pair of small, worn leather boots from a wooden chest. They were old, lovingly mended, the leather softened with age and care. He placed them on the floor beside the cot. A silent offering. A promise. The last image seared into her mind was the lamplight catching the silver in his dark hair as he turned away, leaving her to the quiet dark. Days bled into one another, measured by the rhythm of the sun and the quiet routines of the cabin. Elara, for that was the name she carried unspoken within her, like a smooth, heavy stone, healed slowly. The wounds on her feet began to close, the raw flesh knitting together under Silas's continued, silent care. He would redress them each morning, his touch still gentle, his face unreadable but for the faint softening around his mouth when she managed a weak, tremulous smile. She learned the landscape of his silence. It was not empty, but full of unspoken things, of a life lived with integrity and a sorrow deeply buried. She would watch him as he worked, mending tack, chopping wood, his movements economical and strong. He asked no questions, and she offered no answers. The terror that had been her constant companion began to recede, like a tide going out, leaving behind the raw ache of memory but also a tentative, fragile hope. The boots still sat beside her cot. She hadn't dared touch them yet. They felt like a sacred offering, too precious for her sullied hands, her unworthy feet. One afternoon, while Silas was out checking his trap lines, she found the strength to sit up properly, her head no longer swimming. The cabin was small, meticulously kept. A rough-hewn table, 2 chairs. A stone hearth. Shelves holding a few pewter plates, a couple of books with cracked spines. On a small, carved shelf above the fireplace, a single, faded daguerreotype in a simple wooden frame. A woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, her hair upswept, a lace collar at her throat. Martha. Elara knew it instinctively. The air around the image seemed softer, warmer. She felt a pang, not of jealousy, but of a shared understanding of loss, though her own losses were of a different, more violent kind. She ran a finger over the dusty sill. She needed to do something, to offer some small return for the sanctuary he had given her. His shirt, draped over the back of a chair, had a tear near the cuff. Her fingers, clumsy at first, found the needle and thread he kept in a small wooden box with his shaving things. The stitches were small, uneven, but she repaired the tear, the simple act of balm to her own frayed spirit. When he returned, he noticed the mended cuff immediately. He picked up the shirt, looked at the stitches, then at her. His gaze was direct, a flicker of something unreadable in those winter sky eyes. He merely nodded, a single, curt acknowledgement, but she saw the corner of his mouth lift, just barely. That evening, after their silent meal of stew and coarse bread, he gestured to the boots. They were Martha's, he said, his voice still low, but clearer now. She had small feet. They might serve. Elara looked at the boots, then at her own bandaged feet. The linen was clean, the skin beneath pink and healing. Slowly, she reached for them. The leather was supple, worn into a kindness. She slipped her right foot in. It was a little loose, but with thick stockings, it would fit. A shoe. A covering. A shield against the harshness of the world. Tears welled, blurring her vision. Not tears of pain or fear, but of a gratitude so profound it felt like a wound itself, but a clean one, one that might finally heal. The following week settled into a rhythm of quiet companionship. Elara's strength returned, color blooming faintly on her high cheekbones. She took to wearing Martha's boots, the soft leather a constant, gentle embrace around her scarred feet. They were a talisman, a symbol of a life given back to her. She began to help with small tasks around the cabin, tending the small vegetable patch Martha had planted years ago, now mostly wild but still yielding stubborn greens, sweeping the packed earth floor, ensuring the fire never died. Silas accepted her help with the same quiet grace he offered everything. He spoke little, but his presence was a steady anchor. Sometimes, in the evenings, he would take out one of the old books and read aloud, his voice surprisingly resonant as he navigated tales of faraway lands or the simple poetry of the earth. She would listen, mending his clothes or carding wool he'd traded for in a distant settlement, the words weaving a fragile tapestry of peace around them. The shadows of her past still lingered, of course. In the dead of night, she would sometimes wake with a choked cry, the face of Thorn leering from the darkness of her memories, the man who had paid for her passage, believing he had bought her soul along with her servitude. He was a man of cold eyes and colder hands, his breath always smelling of stale whiskey and thwarted power. The man she had fled from, leaving behind a life that was a slow, suffocating death. She never spoke of him to Silas, but she knew, with a chilling certainty, that Thorn was not a man to easily accept defeat, or the loss of what he considered his property. One morning, Silas rode out early, saying only he was going to the trading post, a journey of 2 days. The solitude felt different now, not threatening, but hollow. She kept busy, the rhythm of work a comfort. She even baked a small, lopsided loaf of bread with their dwindling flour, the scent filling the cabin with a hominess that brought an ache to her chest. On the second day, as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and bruised purple, she saw a rider approaching. Not Silas. This man was stout, florid-faced, riding a tired horse with an air of impatient authority. Her heart seized. It was him. Thorn. He reined in his horse a few yards from the cabin, his eyes, small and cruel, sweeping over her, a possessive glint within them. Well, well, he sneered, his voice like gravel. Thought you could disappear, did you, girl? Cost me a fair bit, you did. Ilara stood frozen, Martha's boots suddenly feeling like lead weights. The bread she clutched in her hands felt like a stone. I'm not going back, she managed, her voice a reedy whisper. Thorn laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You don't have a choice, my dear. You're mine. Bought and paid for. He began to dismount, a riding crop tapping against his thigh. Just as his boot hit the ground, another sound joined the tense silence, the steady beat of hooves. Silas. He rode in from the west, the setting sun at his back, making him a dark, formidable silhouette. He didn't hurry his horse, but there was an undeniable power in his approach. He stopped beside Ilara, his gaze fixed on Thorn. Thorn straightened, a flicker of surprise, then annoyance, crossing his face. This your new protector, girl? He asked, his tone mocking. This ain't your concern, old man. She's my property. I have papers. Silas dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate. He stood a head taller than Thorn, his frame leaner but radiating a quiet strength that Thorn's bluster couldn't match. She's not property, Silas stated, his voice calm, yet edged with steel. She's a woman who owes me. Thorn spat, his face flushing darker. She broke contract. Stole from me by leaving. He took a step forward. Ilara flinched, instinctively moving closer to Silas. Silas didn't look at her, but she felt the subtle shift of his body, placing himself more fully between her and the threat. What's her name, then, if she ain't yours? Thorn challenged, gesturing with the crop. Every dog has a name. Ilara's breath caught. She had never told Silas her name. It was a secret she had guarded, a last piece of herself Thorn hadn't tainted. She braced for Silas to admit he didn't know, for Thorn to crow in triumph. Silas's gaze didn't waver from Thorn. Her name, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the still evening air, is Ilara Miller. Ilara gasped. Miller. His name. He had given her his name. Thorn blinked, momentarily thrown. Miller? Don't know no Millers around here. You lying, old man. She's my wife, Silas continued, the words dropping like stones into a deep well. Each one solid. Irrevocable. The air crackled. Ilara stared at Silas's back, her heart hammering against her ribs. His wife. He had claimed her, in front of the man who had owned her. It was a shield, a fortress, thrown up around her with those 3 simple words. Thorn's eyes narrowed, darting between Silas's resolute face and Ilara's stunned one. He was a bully, accustomed to cowering victims, not quiet defiance backed by an unspoken promise of violence. He searched Silas's expression for any sign of doubt, any waver, and found none. Silas's eyes were like chips of ice, steady and unwavering. The silence stretched, taut and heavy. The wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying the scent of dust and distant rain. You ain't heard the last of this, Thorn finally blustered, but the conviction had gone out of his voice. He seemed to shrink a little under Silas's unwavering stare. He clearly hadn't anticipated such a steadfast obstacle, nor a claim of marriage. To challenge that was to challenge the man directly, on his own land, and something in Silas's quiet intensity made Thorn reconsider the odds. He backed away, step by grudging step, his face a mask of resentment. He remounted his horse clumsily. "You'll regret this, Miller," he snarled, more for his own benefit than theirs. He jerked the reins, turning his horse, and rode away, a bitter, retreating figure swallowed by the encroaching twilight. The sound of his horse's hoofs faded, leaving behind a silence even deeper than before. Ilara stood, trembling, the forgotten loaf of bread still in her hands. The dust settled. The crickets began their evening song, hesitant at first, then bolder. Silas turned to her. His face was unreadable in the dim light, but his shoulders seemed less rigid. She looked at him, tears streaming silently down her face, washing clean streaks through the dust that had settled there. "My wife," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. He met her gaze, his own softening. He took the bread from her unresisting fingers, placing it on the small outdoor table. "He won't be back," Silas said, not answering her question directly. "Men like Thorn, they prey on the weak, the alone. He sees you ain't alone no more." He paused, then added, his voice so low she almost didn't catch it, "And you ain't weak, Ilara." He knew her name. How? Had she murmured it in her fevered sleep? Or had he simply known? It didn't matter. He had spoken it. He had given her his. He had stood for her. The simple, profound courage of it undid her. She sank onto the rough bench, the strength leaving her legs. He sat beside her, not touching, but his presence a warmth beside her. The sky deepened to indigo, stars pricking the darkness one by one. "The boots," she said, looking down at Martha's boots on her feet. "They fit." Almost a small smile touched Silas's lips, a rare and precious thing. "Martha always said good boots take you to good places. Or bring good things to you." He looked out at the vast expanse of the plains, now peaceful under the blanket of night. "This place, it's been empty a long time." He turned his gaze back to her, and in his eyes, she saw not pity, but a quiet invitation. A hope. "A man needs a name to give," he said softly. "And a woman needs a place to rest her heart, as well as her feet." He reached out then, his calloused hand covering hers where it lay on the bench. His touch was warm, firm. A promise. Not of grand passion, perhaps, but of shared sunrises, of quiet companionship, of a home built on resilience and unexpected grace. A place to finally, truly, rest. Ilara looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, silhouetted against the starry sky. The fear was gone, replaced by a tentative, burgeoning peace. She had walked for 3 days with no shoes, a creature hunted and broken. He had given her his name, and with it, a dignity she thought forever lost. He had given her rest, and with it, the quiet, steady promise of a new beginning. The wind whispered secrets through the grasses, no longer mournful, but carrying the scent of healing, and the distant, sweet promise of rain. Here, under the vast, watchful sky, 2 solitary souls had found an anchor in the storm. What does it truly mean to offer sanctuary? Is it merely a roof and a meal, or is it the brave act of sharing one's name, one's strength, one's carefully guarded peace with another in desperate need? Perhaps the greatest acts of love are not declared in grand pronouncements, but lived in quiet moments of steadfast protection and shared silence. If this story of courage and connection touched your heart, let us know in the comments below. What does the idea of Homer mean to you when all else is lost? Don't forget to subscribe for more tales of the human spirit, and click the next video to continue the journey.